Derek, always good to be in your presence. So, what's on deck for us today?
Well, today we're going to talk about ambition with our good friend, Melinda Jordan from Chicago. We're bringing her back, and I'm always excited to hear her. I know she's going to take us to church again, like she did the last time, so I'm looking forward to that. But you and I also had a couple of really interesting conversations around different forms of ambition and planning and assisting our heirs or inheritors or our descendants in terms of helping them prepare, think about different ways of improving their lots in life.
Yeah. Yes. And the conversation that's more fresh for me at the moment is an initial brainstorm discussion that we've had with a soon-to-be guest on the podcast, who's basically a music nerd, a hip-hop aficionado. And we wanted to talk with him about what was the inheritance of, or what did we learn from the hip hop culture that grew up out of the streets. For those of us who are Gen X, we were growing up in neighborhoods where what we were experiencing was informing hip hop, and hip hop was informing how we understood what we were experiencing. And he has so much to say. Excited about when we finally have him on the show. But one of the things that really resonated powerfully for me in his reflections in our initial conversation was about this way that as Black people in our experience historically, it's often hard to convey institutional knowledge. Like, we may not know that we actually need to hand off something to those around us or those who are coming after us. Because if we're focused on the struggle, the survival, we're not necessarily thinking about how to protect what comes next. And one examples he was talking about is just those who developed wealth through the industry of hip hop, and not necessarily explaining to those who came after how not to get taken advantage of, for example, in that industry. So one of the things he said is we lack institutional knowledge, and we have to learn the same lessons over and over. And that makes me think about how one of the things that today's guest has talked about is that in the coming years, the net wealth, the net worth of your average Black family will be close to zero, if not less than $0. Mm-hmm. That is stunning, devastating, and not coincidental. It's not happenstance. And so this hip hopper was talking about how, we're always in those first 5 steps over and over again. But what if we could do something like hand off to someone else? Like, here, I'm going to give you a head start. I'm going to show you what I learned. I'm going to show you how to navigate this institution or that. I'm going to leave a life insurance policy for you. Like, when I heard him say life insurance policy, I almost started crying, because it's like, right, when you think about just even the rates of death in Black families, Black communities, if there's a life insurance policy that's left behind for your children or your cousins or whatever, think about the impact of that. So you're not just starting over, or the people who come after you or who are left behind aren't just starting over. So all that to say, that's fresh in my mind right now. And I know that today's guest is going to be able to take that and anything else and have us dive right in to what it means to have a sense of ambition. And perhaps that sense of ambition is propelled by this understanding that what you're doing is not just for survival. It is actually for the benefit, for the thriving of people around you and those who come after you. How do you take yourself and your efforts seriously in that way? So today's guest is...
Before you introduce her, because I was just thinking...
Oh, you have thoughts?
Yeah, I have thoughts too. Yes. So I was thinking that when we had that initial conversation, and then what you were just saying, yes, I think it is important. It is imperative for us to provide the wealth and the knowledge to people who succeed us, but there also needs to be some level of ambition from the people who succeed us to want to do something with it. And that's the thing. So I'm not in a point where I can provide wealth to people, but I can provide knowledge of what I get to where I am. And there are people who will say to me, "Oh, how are you doing that? How have you done that? Can I talk to you?" And I'll say, "Sure, absolutely. Let me know anytime you're ready to talk. I'm happy to talk to you." And then I never hear from them again. I don't see them taking action. And, not to blame them, life happens, things come up, but I don't know if the expectation is that I chase them down or that at some point the right moment and the right time will happen where they'll be like, oh, now life is not happening at all. I have this free moment, and so I can just take it all in. And that almost never happens for anybody. So I feel like there has to be, it's kind of like a handshake. Both people have to reach out to each other and make this happen. It doesn't just sort of happen on its own one way or the other.
That's true. That's true. There's got to be a handoff. There's got to be a receiving of the knowledge, the access, and how do you then leverage that thing that you've received?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So let's bring on the guest.
Yes, our guest today is a return guest, Melinda Jordan, who is a fellow colleague. She is a real estate advisor with Jameson Sotheby's International Realty in Chicago. We're so delighted to bring Melinda into the room.
Good morning. Good morning. Excited to see you guys both again.
You too. Thanks for coming back.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So you heard a little bit of, our little intro conversation around ambition. Well, the passing on of information and wealth, and also ambition. But before we really dig deep into what that is sort of on a general level, can you tell us about your trajectory? Like, what were your ambitions? Like, we know you're from Mississippi and now you're in Chicago. So what was that ambition? Was there ambition there? Like, what was that trajectory that got you to do that?
Well, I would tell you, I never planned to move to Chicago. Yes, I'm born and raised Mississippi. I used to spend my summers here as a kid. And that happened a lot, right? With Southerners. Our parents sent us to the big city for the summer, and those from the big city went to the South. And so my childhood is no different in that respect. But while here, I learned a lot about what it meant to live in a big city. And to be honest, that it wasn't a place I was most interested in, because I felt like even in the summer times in Chicago, that I was forced to grow up a little quicker than I was accustomed to. So always being guarded, what I call now operating in survival mode always. And so I felt like I matured quicker in the summers in Chicago than I probably did in all the time I spent at home. And so I wasn't necessarily interested in that. However, as a real estate investor, over time, I decided I wanted to become a realtor and an advisor full time. And because I'm a marketer by trade, I'm very left brain. And so I did a whole analysis around what cities would be best for me if I'm going to pursue real estate brokerage as a career. And I focused on three things. I needed the city to be global. I needed the city to have a high concentration of Fortune 1000 companies represented. And I also needed a city that was culturally advanced, in my opinion, as it related to Black culture. And so only a few cities met that for me. And oh, by the way, the fourth one was affordable. Mm-hmm. And only a few cities met that for me, and Chicago was one of them. And so I actually ended up in Chicago for the purpose of pursuing real estate, just because the city met every single one of those requirements. The only issue was how cold it would get. So I was like, well, four out of five is good. So I came to Chicago strategically just to pursue real estate.
So, but it seems like there was an element of risk, because you said when you were younger, you felt like you were growing up too fast and the city didn't really, there was sort of like not a really good emotional fit there. So, moving all the way across the country seemed like it would, necessitate an element of risk. How did you navigate that? Like, how did that calculate into what you were thinking?
It's one thing I learned about myself, and I think it's probably true for our body of people. And when I say that, Black people, women, groups that are largely marginalized or spaces have been created. There have been barriers created in spaces for us to win. If we're given a level playground, we always excel. when the opportunity is presented. For me, the challenge was I thought that I was a risk taker. I went through my career thinking I was a risk taker. It wasn't until I made the decision that I would then pursue entrepreneurship that I realized I was gravely risk adverse. The decisions I had made over the course of my career prior to real estate were really decisions that were ingrained in me of what I should be doing. You should be going to college. You should be doing well. You should be getting a good job. And so while I enjoyed that career, I realized that so many of the decisions I had made was because I wanted to preserve and honor my family's expectations of me and what that meant to my people and my culture. Entrepreneurship was a different animal. I did not come from a family of entrepreneurs. My grandfather was the only entrepreneur I knew, and he died when I was 3. And so all I had were his stories. So there was no one I could pull from. How do I make this transition? And so now I'm in a city, and here's what's crazy about it. Now that I look back, I was crazy. I leave corporate America in July of 2010. Anyone that was around in 2010 know exactly what was happening in 2010.
Yeah.
So in 2010, I quit a job, 6-figure job. I moved to Chicago. I have no built-in network. And I decide I'm going to sell real estate in a recession and a housing bust.
Do you know, I didn't know that we did that exactly at the same time. I didn't leave a 6-figure job, but I did leave a job with good benefits, insurance. I did the same thing. I just stopped. And actually, I hadn't stopped. I hadn't just stopped. I did a year or 2 of self-employment in a different kind of business, and then was like, let me try this real estate thing. That was 2010, at the heart of where really the recession was landing on real estate markets. And it was nutty. It was a completely nutty thing and high risk thing to do.
Absolutely. And you don't know until you're in it. And so all of this, while personally, I am financially distressed. I had placed most of my investments were in 2 places: real estate and blue chip stocks. Both had failed.
Devastated. Right? Yeah.
And so my accountant said to me, he's like, Melinda, 2 of these properties are dogs. You got to let them go. You'll never make this money back in the time that you need. So that meant I foreclosed on 2 properties. My 401k and all that was garbage. I literally had $30,000 left in those accounts. And so he said, you know what? You're moving to Chicago. You're going to start all over. The best time now to buy another place is now. So take this 30,000 and make it work.
Amazing.
I withdrew everything I had. I bought a 2-bedroom garden unit in Bronzeville, which is Chicago's version of Harlem. And I had to bet on me.
Exactly.
To trust that God knows that this decision was from him and not from me, and it was going to work out. Now, thank God it worked like that, but it made me more resourceful and savvy. So I went from 6 figures to my first year making $21,000. But I had taken that $30,000. I bought this condo, so I had very little overhead. I paid my car note off. And then I had savings. So I was prepared to live very minimally for a year and a half. And so I just focused on what did I need to do to win and to be a success. All of this while calling off an engagement. So was going to get married. Now I'm not getting married. And so my life was just in this gray space. And what I enlisted and entrusted as a part of this process, which I felt was the most needed for me, was a therapist. So the therapist that process is what helped me understand that I was in this season of extreme risk. And I was uncomfortable, not just because of the change. I was uncomfortable because I had not I didn't come from a culture of people who could handle that amount of risk at one time.
Oh, okay. Hold on one second, because I think I'm risk tolerant. But when I hear your story, I would run the other way, because all the things that you just laid out, I don't know if that was in a 6-month timeline or a 1-year period of time. That's a lot. And I can imagine, and I'm in real estate just the way the two of you are. I'm imagining that someone who's watching this, who is considering real estate or considering making a big move, might hear this and be like, wow, I'm not ready. So did you focus, and I don't know if you remember, but did you focus mostly on where you were and the steps you needed to take just to survive? Or were you all, were you also thinking about, okay, my goal is to be here. And so even though I need to work on these specific, 2 to 5 steps now to survive, I know that by doing this, I will get to this goal later.
Right. Right. I will tell you it's a little bit of both. I learned in my corporate life, like you hone in on 3 things. Anything more than that is trivial. And so I set a goal of what I wanted to experience financially, what I wanted to experience from a health perspective. And health involves not just my physical health, but my mental health. And the third was, what did I want to experience in relationships? And because in my mind, if I made traction in all 3 of those, I couldn't help but grow and win. And so, but you constantly get distracted by what's happening to you in real time. And so what would happen is, if it had to deal, the reality was the reality. The reality was I had no money. I didn't have the luxury of a trust fund or somebody I could call to lend me money, because I was a person people called. I'm the person you call when you needed some money. And so when I realized I really did not have a real safety net, that if I fail, I need to fail fast and move forward.
And are you defining safety net as just your financial one, or are you talking about your interpersonal one as well?
All of it. I realized I was the go-to for everyone. I was the go-to if they needed money, if they had an issue and they wanted somebody they felt that could be objective. I was the person they called for that. But I didn't have anyone. And so for all 3 of those goals, I set, to your point, I set steps or things that I that could help me. But the other part of it was, I said, how can I get these things done for free, or can I barter them? So when it came to therapy, I had basic insurance, but my insurance did not cover therapy. So I started reaching out to churches and nonprofit organizations that would have free offerings. Oh, if you would give me 6 sessions for free, I'm going to do those 6 sessions for free. I understood that meditation and yoga could help me. Well, I knew I could go on YouTube and get that for free. So it forced me to be resourceful in spaces where I needed support that I could not fund. And I did that about everything. When it came to real estate and trying to build a network, I realized that, Chicago, like many cities, we can be a bit cliquish based on where we have commonality. And I was coming into the city and had no point of commonality with people from here. So I realized that my network were people like me, other transits. So then I started going on Eventbrite and other places, wherever there was somewhere free to go that my body of people might be, I went there. And I realized over time that I had spent my entire corporate career not being as resourceful as I could have been, just because it was convenient and easy and I had the resources. Well, now I don't have them. And so that was how I worked in, like, what's next? Oh, I need this. Where can I go to get this from the city or from other resources? Who's willing? So it forced me to be vulnerable and to ask for help. And I learned that I culturally hadn't been taught that it was okay to ask for help.
Right. You also said earlier that when women and people of color are given opportunity, they thrive. But it sounds like what you're describing doesn't sound like well, one, we know that the playing field is never even. It's going to be a while before it is even. But it sounds like what you're describing was existing in this uneven playing field.
Yeah.
And yet you still managed to get to a point where you're thriving. At least it looks like you're thriving from this perspective. And so did you at one point realize that like you're at a point where like you reached a pivot point and you could begin thriving? Or was there a point where you said, okay, if I connect enough of these dots, I will get to the starting point of where I can thrive?
Yes. It was just that I was moonlighting when I got here, and I saw that $21,000 was not going to work. And it was going to take longer to build out my real estate business here. I went back and I leveraged my experience as a brand marketer. And remember, one of the reasons I chose Chicago was that it had a large concentration of Fortune 1000 companies. And so with that, I then, in talking to a mentor, said, how do I package my experience in corporate America and become and be a consultant or be a contractor? Because I had not made it to the level of VP or director, but I was a senior manager. And so what my mentor had said to me is like, look, you're actually in a sweet spot. You have a level of skill that you still know how to do the work, but you've also managed people and you also know what it means to present up into leadership. And that's the space within corporate America where there's a lot of turnover or people are on leave. And so I then researched what consulting and temporary agencies in the city of Chicago have the most extensive consumer packaged goods companies on their roster as clients, and that specialize in placing marketers and brand people. And so then I found that there were 3 of them. And so I then reached out to all 3, met with all 3, got on all 3's roster. And that became what I considered my side hustle, because it would create income while I'm building this business. And that's exactly what happened. When I started taking on those assignments, it opened up even more assignments. But what it also did for me is it organically created relationships with me with the client base I was pursuing.
Yeah.
So now I'm in these corporate offices and I would have people pull me aside and it's like, yeah, we watch your social media. You're a realtor? You're an investor? I'm like, yeah. And it's like, well, you never talk about it, because I was trying to keep the businesses separate, not realizing the value was in them coming together.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was that resourcefulness. All right, you got this skill. How do you package this skill and monetize this skill? Not knowing that same experience is going to create my whole business model.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was literally, I'm not trying to figure out what I want to do, what the step is 10 steps ahead. I just want to go from 1 to 2.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay. If I get from 1 to 2, how do I go from 2 to 3? So once I started to see that business was coming from those clients, I then said, what is it going to take for me to leave the consulting work?
Yeah.
Focus just on real estate. And so now I have an income target on the real estate side. And for me, it was, if I make 75% of what I made as in consulting in my first year of in the first year I get to that in real estate, I'm going to focus on this full time. I'm going to put all my energy here. And so some people are like, why you wouldn't wait 3 more years? No. Once I get to this income, I'm all in. And that happened in September of 2018. When September of 2018 hit, that year, that month, I made 75% in real estate commissions of what I've been making annually as a consultant. And I remember I left a 6-figure job and my consulting was 6 figures too. And so then I branched out. But what was it for my clients that weren't a part of corporate America? They were like, well, you haven't been a full-time agent all this time.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't realize, because the experience for me needed to be as if I was full-time. I didn't need them to know it was like I was doing 2 things part-time.
Right.
I wanted their experience to still be full-time. So when the transition happened, There was no, my service and service level just got better versus different. And so that's how the transition happened for me. I realized I'm risk adverse naturally, but I'm able to eat away at it when I lay out the step.
Yeah.
To where what I need to have happen to get to where I need to be. And when I lay out the steps, I even do it now in my business plan. If I put a goal in there, I'm laying out every single step. I'm identifying who can support me in getting there and how. I'm even laying out when I reach out to that person for support. And the book 12-week year literally was a game changer for me to do that. And so I know going into whatever my next step is, who I need to be talking to, or where do I need to sign up for a class? Do I need realizing that I need to become a student of my goals. I can't just set them without choosing to be a student in a ongoing ferocious learner about how do I get there.
Ferocious learner.
Right. So, okay, so you mentioned risk averse and being risk tolerant, or risk averse versus being risk tolerant. You then took us to leveraging your skills, leveraging the dollars you have in one place in order to get to the next step of the new place. But then you also mentioned celebrating the wins. So one, I guess, is how do you know when you have a win? And then two, what do you do to celebrate?
Yeah, actually this came up probably in the last year. So one of the goals I had last year is I need to scale. For me to be able to meet my own personal and financial goals, I can no longer be a solo realtor. Like I need support staff and team around me. And so I identified the 3 things I need in the order of what impact they'll have on my business. The first was I made a decision I needed a coach. And historically, I've been using free coaching services like Score. Like, again, remember, I'm trying to find all the free ways to get what I can. I'm watching YouTube. I'm listening to podcasts. And I sat back and I realized if the best people in their game have a coach, why do I think I don't need one? If the people playing in the NBA gotta go, why do I think I'm going to win this watching YouTube and podcasts? And so I spent all of last year.
But let me just say, we have a great podcast here, so keep watching.
Absolutely. Inspire you to do something actionable. Listening to podcasts, listening to YouTube, reading books should inspire you to make a step. And so for me, I spent last year listening to podcasts, reading more books, going to more seminars. I had identified 3 coaching platforms that I thought would work for me because I knew I not only needed a business coach, I needed a life coach. I needed all of these. And as you know, you can get a coach for each of those. And I was like, that's too much. I need a space where everything about who I am, my life, where the intersecting points are and how they feed and support one another. And so I decided I decided to go with Tony Robbins, his coaching format. And so people are like, oh my God, it's terribly expensive. But is it too expensive to invest in me? At what point am I willing to put some money behind my own plans and goals? At minimum, I'll create a space where I think differently because I realized my issue wasn't execution and skill set. It was mindset. That was my roadblock. I had limiting beliefs that were negatively impacting my growth. I could not read my way out of it. I couldn't watch YouTube out of it. I couldn't listen to podcasts out of it. I needed somebody holding me accountable and leaning into me. So once I signed up for Tony Robbins coaching, and when they called, they was like, "Hey, so do you want to sign up for a year, month to month?" I said, "Lock me in for 2 years. I'm giving you my credit card now for 24 months, because if I don't commit to this for 24 months, then I'm going to find a reason not to be a part of it." And so, to answer your question, that's a long answer to your question around celebrating. I learned in my coaching that I was treating gratitude as celebration when they're different. I'm culturally built to have gratitude because I'm a believer. We're taught and we're trained and as believers to be grateful for all that God created. And that's true. The sun is shining today. I could have not woke, I could not have gotten up. I've got a roof over my head. I eat well. I drive well. Thank you, God. But what I realized is to celebrate is different. That's a different skill and muscle. What was my limiting belief was this. I was carrying a limiting belief that if I celebrated what I've been given in my wins, that I was in some way carrying a bit of grief and unsettledness because there's so many people that look like me that aren't there yet. And so I would not celebrate it because I didn't want to come off as she's doing too much. I mean, think about all the comments we say to one another. You're doing too much. Oh, you're bougie. Oh, she's got to show everybody where she's going. She's wearing nice clothes. She's driving. I was so consumed with the perception of my celebrating my wins would come off as, isolating myself from my community. But the reality is I am also one of the first in my family. When you're a first generation for a number of reasons, we spend so much time moving on to the next. Oh, I won that. All right. I still got so much ground I need to make up from my people and my family that I wasn't celebrating. So now every time I meet with my coach, after we say good morning, how are you? Her first question to me is, what are we celebrating today, Melinda? And initially it was hard for me to say that. And when I would see it, I would feel bad. I'm like, why am I celebrating that? I shouldn't be celebrating that. There's still too much work to be done. But I've learned from her that it's necessary to not only have gratitude, but it's equally necessary to celebrate because when you leave legacy, you're not only leaving money, you're leaving mindset, you're leaving values, you're leaving think about all the things you want the next generation to have so that they don't grow up with the same limiting beliefs that you have.
Thank you.
Do you think part of the reason that you didn't celebrate, so part of it is cultural. I understand, people say you're too bougie, you're doing too much. I get that. But is there a gender aspect to it too? Do women have pressure not to celebrate, not to be too ostentatious with some of their wins?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then I would add to that being Southern, right? We've got all these layers to how we're supposed to behave. And, we should always be humble. And humble means not saying much and being a bit timid. It's all of these limiting beliefs. But it's forcing, I'm being trained to peel back the layers on the limiting beliefs and replacing them with empowering beliefs. So I'll share one that's really personal for me. In a session I went through through the Tony Robbins program, where you have to list your top 3 limiting beliefs. We all have them, but you had to list your top 3 and you had to share them with a stranger. So we're in this huge conference and we did that. And so one of my limiting beliefs was because I am Black, I'm female, and I'm Southern, that my journey in life will always be difficult. So I would wake up every morning with that embedded in my heart.
Yeah.
Even though I would walk out in the world like I'm fierce and I'm boss, but I'm wearing a mask. And so I was challenged to turn that into an empowering belief. So now when I get up in the morning, I say to myself, yes, I'm Black, I'm female, I'm Southern, I'm thin, I'm dark skinned. These are all my superpowers. And today somebody's going to connect with me because of one of those items. And whatever it is, I want to show up well across all of that.
That's powerful.
Can you say that again? Can you say that again?
Yeah.
No, literally. Can you say that again, please?
No, it's the empowering belief. It's saying hey, yes, all of these things are true about me, but today, whoever runs across my path, I'm connecting with them on one of those things. And that is okay. And so like now I don't feel, even with my faith, I learned that I was a closet Christian, right? I do the things I do during the day, and then I go to church on Sunday, but I don't tell anybody I go to church. I meditate and pray every morning. I'm not telling everyone I do that. That was the second limiting belief. If I let people know what I believe, they're going to judge me. But now, like my Women's Day, every month I do, not every month, every year during Women's Month, which is March, I do something for all the females in my network, clients, friends, everyone. This year, during the same time was Jesus Week at my church. So if you go to a Black church, it's really Revival. We call it Jesus Week. I made a decision that this year's event was an invitation to all the women in my network to pick a day to come to church with me. I would have never done that years ago because of fear of isolating someone.
You know, MJ, you it's almost like we could just let you go in talking, because you just answered one of my questions in my mind, which is, how do you build community in the empowering belief? How do you not just have this be a mantra that you're telling yourself or that your coach is holding you accountable to? How do you live it in your interactions? How are people holding that with you? How are they adopting their own versions around you? So how has that been unfolding as you're basically integrating your whole self into your world?
Absolutely.
Like, yeah. So how is that playing out, and how are you seeing that convey more wealth, frankly, in all the ways that you have defined it? Relationships, financial, but also physical and mental.
What I'm finding is the first is my stress level is down because I'm not having to wear all these masks.
Yes.
Like I'm getting to be my authentic self, and by default I am attracting the kind of people I've been asking God to send me.
Yes.
Right. The other part of it is that then translates into business. So like if a client is experiencing things with me, when they refer me, think about when you refer someone to someone else, you tell them what is it about them that you're referring them. So now my clients can speak about who I am as a person and say, hey, if you go to MJ, this is how she moves through the world.
Yeah.
But when a person goes on my social media, every part of my business is an extension of me. If you call me and leave a message, my messages are different than a normal like realtor. Like I get messages from realtors like, oh my God, your voicemail is just so empowering. I just want to have coffee with you. Like I really believe in energy.
Yes.
Like
you feel it.
Have the energy you want to attract. And we hold on to all the good energy.
Yes.
You are supposed to guard your heart and guard your time. You called to do that. But guarding it doesn't mean keeping it closed.
Yeah.
It means choosing the situations and when it should be open and when it should not. And so that allows me to pull it in together. And then where I need help, I ask. When I need a referral, I go to my clients. Like, hey, I'm looking for this. Who do you know? You're trusting me. I'm trusting you.
No,
but go ahead, Derek.
No, I mean, I was just going to say, I like the positioning that you have in terms of how you bring together all the different elements of your life and incorporate them in some ways into your business, because I'm just beginning to get to that stage. So, I have my consulting, I have my real estate, we have a podcast, I do some like photography. Like I have like all these different elements that I could and probably should start thinking about incorporating into being a more cohesive whole. But I haven't put enough thought into it to do it thoughtfully and to do it well. But now hearing you talk about it and hearing you describe how that has changed your approach to business, changed your approaches to people, changed your approach to life generally, I'm inspired. I actually want to call you now and hear your voice message to hear what it says. So I'm just thinking about like, how can I start doing this? As you're talking, I'm thinking about like all the different pieces and how do I bring it together. So I have it digitally as a link tree link. So if you go to my link tree, you can see all that. But I feel like there's a higher level that I can take it to.
Yeah, because you're really talking, Melinda, about how you show up everywhere
Yeah.
in each moment and then attract the kind of relations and the kind of conversations that you need to have. And I have to say, I mean, there's something you say fearless, vulnerable about that. But I also, what I hear is fearlessness in that, right? Like we don't actually have to be, I hear the language of superpower a lot, or like black joy, all the big, big, big. And I think that's fine. We don't actually have to be up in the stratosphere all the time. What we want to be actually is grounded and connected in a way that's real. For me lately, that feels like things that are small. Like
Right.
I'm really recognizing I can't do all the things. I can't. I really, social media, for example, I can't prioritize it time wise, attention wise. So there's a lot that I could be sharing and showing that I just don't get to. But I'm living life, right? And so I have to give myself a sense of grace and permission that maybe we're not firing on all cylinders at all times, or you're not going throttle in all ways, but you can do a few small things really well in a way that has traction, that builds genuine connection and relationships and possibilities that you wouldn't have imagined. So I'm listening to you and trying to think about, yeah, how do I let myself just be free of feeling like I'm not actually doing enough? No, you could say I've done this and that, but I haven't done all these things yet. And I'm not even, touching those things yet. But to just
Right.
like actually notice what is organic, where there's connections that are real, where it's fun, where something is leading you that you don't have all charted out. And so I don't know, that's what I'm feeling and sort of appreciating as I'm listening to you.
And
No,
I also
absolutely.
I just want to, sorry to cut, I also want to add that, yes, there are small things that we can do, but I think that's different from living small, because I find that when people,
Yeah.
I find recently I'm around people who are like, oh, well, you don't do it the way we do. You don't do it the way that's do. And if you did it those ways, then, we would accept it more. And I'm like, but what if I don't want to?
That's
And
interesting.
so it's kind of like, I understand there's a need to sort of collaborate. I understand there's a need to sort of like have there be some type of shared understanding, but that doesn't mean that I have to live by someone else's definition, live my life by someone else's definition of what a life is. And to me, that's living small. And I tell people I do not want to live small. And I don't think that people really understand what that means.
Right.
No, I totally agree. And I think what happens though is we spend so much time living that we don't spend enough time dreaming and putting those dreams to paper. So I can say, so like right now, I am planning, I'm a few years out from turning 50. And so I prayed about like, what does that look like for me? And I'm calling it my road to 50 and 50, right? And so what I've decided is I am going to pick 25 experiences that I want to have.
Mm.
And I'm only inviting the 50 people who've had the greatest impact on my life.
Mm.
And they get to decide what part of the experience they want to take with me. And so for a while I was struggling with, well, what about the people I don't invite? Are they going to be mad? But I said, this is my road to 50.
Oh, yeah.
And these are people who I've had lessons with. So we may have had poor, falling outs, but I learned something from you. These are people I've looked up to. And that's because they are a part of my journey of me getting here. And I want to honor and say, thank you for pouring into me.
Wow.
Enough that I can be more intentional about who I pour into.
Yes.
And that's to your point. That's not living small. That's making small strides and saying, here's what it is. Like there are random things on the list, from I want to go to the Oscars, right?
That's not that random or small.
Like, what I'm saying is think about it. 25 top experiences I want to have.
Yes.
Right. Well, how is that different from bucket list? Bucket list could be just stuff you say, hey, I think I want to try that. These are experiences. These are memories I want to create. And so I'm literally having fun just being inspired by like somebody else's experience. Oh, I never thought about that. I might want to do that. But it's, to your point, it's making the decision. I'm going to live big, but I get to define what big looks like.
Yeah, that's right. Big as in expansive, big as in not limiting. And I have to admit, I feel a little sadness listening. And I think I hear this all the time with you, Derek. And it's just this moment occurred to me. What I want for you is to be surrounded by people who aren't second guessing or questioning your ambitions. Cause it's like, yeah, right? There's a spectrum of expectation. And what we're trying to talk about is that as Black people, we can actually afford to have expectations for ourselves and not have to think about like what other people are going to be worried about or whether or not they're questioning or going to come along. And I think I've lived my life that way as a first generation across the board, lots of first generation things. Lots of first generation identities. I think that's one way that Derek and I connect because we do break outside of a mold of expectation. But like, yeah, I think that's what I want. I'm just putting this in the middle of this conversation for us is to be surrounded by people where we're not having to filter through their fears, their doubts, their questioning, their confusions, their dismissal. I don't actually live my life like that. And maybe I filter too much, but I actually don't have much space or, bandwidth for conversation where people are questioning what I'm doing. I want more people who are actually going to spur me. So that's the thing that I feel like I want in my life is more people where I'm like, oh, that's how I do XYZ thing. And I think that's why we're in this conversation with each other too, is because we want to bounce off and feel each other's intelligence and what we're knowing. What is the forefront that each of us is pushing? That's really important to surround yourself with. So that to me is important for mindset.
But how do you find people? That's the question I would have because
and maybe that's what this podcast is. It's like
right. Because I feel like I've been second guessed almost my entire life.
Yeah.
And so there was a point where I was kind of like, well, wait, I know how to do this. I know who to talk to. I understand how to do these things. Why are people saying yesing me? And then I would do them and they'd say, how'd you do that? And I'm like, I just did it. So, by that
question in your life. I'm bored by that question in your life. I'm tired of hearing that question about your life because I hear you say that a lot. And people are like, oh my God, done. Like, what if you just turned 50? You know what I mean? Like, let's have you have. I know. Because I'm so fucking proud and excited that you turned 50. Look at you. You're gorgeous.
I know. Look, looking 35 over there.
I got it. And so it's like what I want for you is to be surrounded by a cohort of peers who are actually pushing their own forefronts. That's come on, let's not waste our time here.
Well, I think it's the fear factor, though. It goes back to the fear factor. Sorry to cut. It goes back to the fear factor that we've talked about in a couple of these episodes. And I have these conversations with people because I was asked once at Thanksgiving by someone who has a partner. He said to me, aren't you afraid of dying alone? And I'm like, I'm not afraid of very many things. And I'm definitely not afraid of that because there's so much out there to experience. There's so many other ways. And to assume that just because I'm not in a partnership that I'm alone, I think was just, for me, it's like this weird leap because it's like the people I have around me are my people. So even though I may not be dating them or whatever, they're still my people. So I don't feel alone. So just the concepts and the fear that drove that question, I thought was I don't even know what the word is. It was just outside the realm of my normal path of thinking.
Well, it spoke more to them. So, one of the things I learned, I've learned in this process of coaching through Tony Robbins is we need to spend more time asking more valuable questions. The question you ask, it's not just a question you ask, it's how you ask it and what your intentions are is indicative of where your mind is and where your heart is. So when that person asked that question, that spoke to their limiting belief around either I live miserably or die alone. Both of those. So if those are your two options, like what does that say about how you feel about life? Like, how do you define what living actually looks like? And so I've learned like and you find it in everything you do. So like now when I'm on seminars and I'm in classes, I'm one of those people who will actually go and see who's going to be speaking, what the topic is. And if I'm spending my time doing it, what questions do I need answered for this value to me? So I go into most sessions with a list of questions.
Yes.
So then as you answer my questions, I'll check them off. And then what's remaining or what's been added, I'll ask. Because now I am using my time wisely. So it's not often I'll go to anything that I find that it was a waste of time. Because I went in it with a plan. It's no different than the people you surround yourself by. Whenever I get negative energy from a person in a group, I always ask, they say go 7 questions deeper. I always ask, so how did you get there? Not why did you get there? How did you get there? And so I'm forcing them to peel back the layers on that question. So now that we can get to a good place. Or I'll say, so what is it about what's happening with you that you need to take the lid off the jar?
Okay, but here, can I ask a question? Because I think we're circling around a thing. And I think part of what happens for me on this podcast is we have all these big ideas, and I credit Derek with his editorial mind and us coming up with these very spacious ideas that I know I agree I co-sign on. But Derek is like, and I want us to take on this thing, right? And so the way that I relate to them often is by feeling.
Yeah.
And so what I'm feeling in this conversation is about the heartbreak of progressing, of moving on, moving further, and feeling like that just involves, it requires, it means leaving people behind.
But do you feel like you're leaving them behind, or is it just the season doesn't call for them?
I don't know. But see, that's too, sorry, now you're just getting a Melony moment. I'm like, that's too fucking nice. I don't actually care. Is the question about, is it their time or not? Or is the question, what does it mean to actually, as you're talking about living authentically, like pursue a goal, pursue a vision, there to attract new kinds of people and resources that will accompany you, that will shuttle you onto that.
Right.
Knowing that you're still connected to wherever it is you're coming from, but people where you're coming from may not actually meet you, match you, stay in whatever pace, if you want to think about it in that way. I think that's just been a heartbreak of my whole life. Where I grew up in, you would very much define as the hood.
Yeah.
I don't relate very much. I'm proud of where I come from. It definitely defined how I move through the world, my matter of factness, my intensity, my bravery, my bluntness. But also, I'm not looking back to where I came from as a point of reference in any way at all.
There's an element of choice. There's an element of choice on the part of the other people too. So you're making choices to.
That's what I'm saying. So it's heartbreaking if they're not making choices in the same pace or same arenas as you. And that, I think what we're trying to talk about is that as Black people, we get to actually dream, as you were saying, big, live big lives, even if we're doing by small steps, but having expansive perspective. But that often is going to mean you're not necessarily going to have everyone sharing that in that with you because of all the conditioning, because of all the mindset. So I think you are taking your people with you in that you're being yourself, you're staying connected, you're staying real, but you have to find ways to look around for other points of reference. And that is heartbreaking and scary.
No, I agree. It is, but we also heard the Chinese proverb, you teach a man to fish, otherwise you will be feeding him, right? Forever. But I think that's the circle of life. Like you move into spaces and there's some people that are going to be in the right season, in the right time, and they're going to get it.
That's what you mean by season and time. I see.
Yeah. They're going to be seasoned. They're just not. And it doesn't mean that something's right with you and wrong with them or wrong with them. Like it's just the journey. Think about it. There's some seasons we missed.
Absolutely.
And you just move through it knowing that I showed up the way I was supposed to. I had the right intentions. And this wasn't their season to receive this message from me or in this time. I can't be worried about the rest of it.
You can't. And that's my point. Is so where do we put our attention? I guess what I'm getting at, as I'm hearing from both of you, is that struggle of like reconciling with the fact that some folks just may not be able to be alongside you. And I'm saying, what if the perspective, the focus, the point of your attention is really on who do I want to be around that's actually going to move me forward? Like that, how do we find and build that kind of connectivity, incubator life network? How do we put our attention on where there are people who we feel are leading us? And I think that's just an important question for us. Maybe that's an important question for us for this podcast too, Derek. It's like,
I was we're talking about two different types of people though, or asking two different questions within the same question.
okay.
There's the people who you start off with, or wherever you're starting from, you start off with them. Your opportunities may not be the same, your resources may not be the same, but you just physically are in the same locale. And so when you make a move to something, they can't keep up, or they don't feel like they can keep up because they don't have the resources. But that doesn't mean you can't extend the invitation and say, when you're ready, let me know I'm here. It kind of goes back to what we started earlier around, you have the knowledge or the financial resources, but the other person has to have the ambition to reach back and say, okay, I'm ready now. And then there's the other group of people who, once you've made that move to the next step, to step 2 or step 3, are any people within that area around you in step 2 or step 3 people who can then keep you moving on to the next step? And when you do that, you can still reach back to those people in step 2 and in step 1 and say, the invitation is still here. So I think there's two groups of people here involved in two different questions. I think we're saying about the connection among them all, but I feel like there's two kind of different questions here and two different sets of people.
I think I'm saying what you're saying, except that I'm saying what I think is exciting and probably an area of growth or what have you for us is to actually put our attention, if not as much, likely more, on the people who are where we're headed or where we want to be than the people that we're reaching back for. And that's the heartbreak. It's just frank. It doesn't mean that you're not still connected, right? To who you are, from where you come from. And there's always that line of connectivity and love and as people would say, realness. But what we're talking about is ambition and mindset. And what is, to me, that means, what does it take to surround yourself with peers who you can learn from, who you can be inspired by, who excite you, who animate your dreams? I dare us to put our attention more there. I think part of the challenge of being Black and first generation in so many different experiences means we're constantly feeling like this tug of like, as you said, MJ, it's hard to celebrate because it feels like
you got so much more work to do. Yeah.
It's not even well earned. It's not sufficient because look, I'm not flanked yet by the folks of where I'm coming from. And I'm just saying, maybe that's not feeding the growth to have that concern,
Absolutely. I think, to both your point, I think there's a way to do both. Like you talked about, you made yourself available. Now the onus is on them to make a decision to circle back. I can't own your growth and mine. I made myself accessible. I've said how I like to work. When you're ready, then reach out. I'm available to you. But then we have to invest in putting ourselves in those circles so we can be fed. And so for me, the people who have the mindset, or it appears that they have the mindset and they are executing at the level I want to execute, I literally put into my annual life plan and business plan how I'm going to be in those circles.
Yes.
Examples for me, I got to be willing to invest. So when I do my budget, I adjust my budget for, I'm going to be at this seminar and this conference because the people I want to learn from are going to be there. But the people I want to meet. And that's another problem, a challenge I think we have as people of color is resources have always historically been so strapped for us. We don't see value in spending money on those things. So I attend probably 4 or 5 conferences every year, and they have all been strategically identified for my growth. I go to TD Jakes ILS, International Leadership Summit, every year. The price ticket for the conference, I don't know how he's getting away with this. It's like $300. But this past year, we were able to hear from, Joe Bryant over, like people at that level. Like, I want to hear from those people. One year, he had Denzel Washington in the master class and the president of Ghana. I want to be in that room because the other people who done paid to get there, they have the same interests I have.
Yeah.
Right. Then let's talk about Sotheby's. Our global network, one of the most expensive experiences you're going to pay for. The tickets are usually what, $2,000?
Starting, yeah.
Starting at $2,000. All right, I'm going to be there. But to your point, how do we get fed? I made a decision to put in my budget. I'm going to be in the places where the people I want to engage with are going to be. It's no different than here in Chicago. People are like, well, I don't want to pay for, why should I join the chamber? That's what the people are that you want to do business with. People, like, we have to make an investment in our growth.
Make an investment.
And that investment is not just resources, it's time. It's making a decision. Am I going to go to this experience or that experience? So like yesterday, the NCAA women's tournament was on, and my friends were like, hey, you should come over after church and have drinks with us. I'm like, well, I'm already having dinner with people from church because we're talking about, our next international trip. Yeah, I hung out with y'all Friday, but today we're going to talk about this experience. Like, is constantly making those decisions that sometimes you're going to be in spaces where you're pouring into other people and you hope they get it. But if they don't get it, it's not your issue. But you also got to be intentional about what spaces do I need to be in.
Yes.
People who are who have gone where I'm trying to go,
Yes.
or further along. So it helps me dream bigger.
Yeah.
I've never known that I would have been in a community of some of the top producing Black agents in the world.
Yeah.
Now I can look at you. I can look at Delroy. I can look at Sean. And when it empowers me that volume potential exists.
Yeah.
But you gotta pay the cost to be there though.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to make the expense.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. This is a lovely note to end on, which is about investing in ourselves, in
all the way.
dreams. Yeah.
And all the way. Yeah. Well, MJ, as always, thank you so much. We appreciate your words of wisdom and your time, investing your time in us. We really appreciate that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you guys are doing ministry work, so we appreciate you in the community.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we hope to see you again on another episode. And we hope to see all of you who are watching as well. Please be sure to like and subscribe. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Black Blind Forum. Take care.
Bye.